Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Roast into Ceilings podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us. Felicity, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Felicity. I would like to stay anonymous, which is why I am using a stage name. But I have been writing for as long as I could speak. And, as a child, I wrote a lot of poetry, but I never thought it would go anywhere. And thankfully, as an adult, I've been able to write short stories, poetry, even a chapter of an anthology that was published in September of 2024.
That's amazing. Can I just ask, art is one of the, I think, one of the most interesting things someone can be into, someone to like a hobby to have. How come since even as an early child you never thought this could be something that you could pursue? Is it something just about writing, the industry? Like, what was it about writing that made you think oh, I don't think this is pursuable?
Even though I was raised with siblings who are also artists in their own right, my older sister played flute and piano, my younger sibling played the violin. I myself played piano. Um, Even though I was raised with siblings who are also artists, I was raised to believe that art is just a hobby. It's not like you cannot feasibly make that your career. And I was raised by Chinese immigrant parents. So my dad is an electrician, and my mom has worked various blue, or not blue, white collar jobs. And so I am the oldest no collar person in my family. And I literally had never heard of the term no collar job until I was watching a reality game show, and some people described themselves as, self employed artists, therefore they're no collar workers. And that just clicked to, what was it, 14-year-old me? And I was like, that is what I'm gonna do when I become a grown up.
That's also not a term I've heard before. That's really fun actually. So since you kind of were felt like kind of that discouraged, like, oh, art can't really be like a feasible job, how do you think that's kind of evolved, like as you've grown up? Like how has your relationship with art and maybe the prospect of it being a job evolved?
Well, I think it's good to make art for yourself.
Mhm.
I think if you start out trying to make content, as the youngins say, just to, you know, gain capital, I think it's not going to seem sincere. And I think you'll get burnt out if you're just making content just for, capital's sake. Because capitalism is a beast. Capitalism is never satisfied.
Do you think that is an issue in the art industry right now where people are just kind of making stuff for capital? Is that something you're
Oh,
seeing?
oh gosh. The first thing that popped into my mind was the film industry, because it's so much harder today to make it in film if you aren't already like the child of a multi-millionaire like executive at HBO. And I wish art was more democratized. I mean, you hear AI in the news like every 5 seconds, and there are some misguided people who think that AI is democratizing art, but in reality, it's, I mean, what I hear, please fact check me on this. What I hear is that a lot of these AI companies are just outsourcing labor in countries like Kenya, where people are exorbitantly underpaid for their output.
For sure. Um, so again, like you talked about, like art has kind of been with you your whole life since like from a kid to now? Like,
Hmm.
what made you so passionate about it? What made it so that it's like, kind of always been with you?
So my parents didn't really talk to me about emotional literacy. And as a child, I was like, I have all these emotions and I don't feel comfortable talking about it with my siblings or my parents. And so writing was my outlet to process my emotions. And even though I look back on the writing 13-year-old me made and cringe, I still keep all the notebooks that I kept as a kid because I am just proud of my younger self for doing the thing, for trying to process her emotions, which is something that I think a lot of middle-aged East Asian parents don't even do.
Definitely. Would you say that's like something you would recommend for people, like to try to channel their emotions into art, into writing?
Oh yes, journaling is very therapeutic, and even when I was in second grade, I remember if I would get agitated by one of my siblings, I would just write an angry letter. But you see, 8-year-old me was not smart enough to write the angry letter and throw it out. 8-year-old me would just write the angry letter, forget about it, and then one of my siblings would find the angry letter and then, like, on the back of it, write a response, and then maybe while I'm cleaning the house, I'll come across it and go, oh, they responded to my angry letter. Um,
I never thought like, oh my God, that it's kind of funny to look back on now, right? But I feel like that would have been a nightmare
the
as it
things
was happening.
8-year-olds get agitated by.
Mm,
Hmm.
for sure. Because like for me personally, like I love journaling too, right? But I've never
Mhm.
been like super big of like a writer. I know a lot of people out there wouldn't call themselves much of like a writer and artist either. So how could you maybe recommend someone get started with this?
I don't think it's realistic to write in a journal daily. I think it's more realistic. Okay, the analogy I'll use is exercise. If you literally never exercise, it's unrealistic to be like, okay, I'm going to exercise 5 days a week every week from now on. You have to take baby steps. Like maybe write about how your day was once every 2 weeks and then gradually every week and then gradually maybe every 3 days.
It's a very practical piece of advice, I think. Like I know I've gone like stretches a month without journaling, and then I'll pick it up again and I'll be like, oh, I gotta write like 6 pages at that time. Um, 'Cause I get where you're coming from. Earlier you mentioned how you actually did kind of publish your first little anthology chapter earlier this year in September. How did that go? How was that process like?
So I believe 2 years ago, I don't think I was approached. I think I came across a website where um, a group of editors said, we would like um, diverse voices to um, email us and say their personal experiences, you know, with sexual exploration. And, I really do pay respect to all the amazing privileges I have today because gay cis men decades ago fought so hard for rights, but I really appreciate how this group of editors was like, hey, we want a diverse range of voices for our upcoming anthology. Yes, of course, we want to hear, gay male voices, but we want more than just white cis gay men. And at the end of every single chapter of the anthology, They have the writer's name, their age, what town they're from, their sexual orientation, their current relationship status. But also, if people wanted to opt out, like if you want to opt out of your pronouns, opt out of your current relationship status, like they respected that and they would just leave that part blank. And so I appreciate how these editors were like, hey, you don't want to publicize this information. If you want to be anonymous, like not even give us a name, like we totally respect that. It's cool.
That sounds incredible. How was the writing process like? How long did it take you to maybe get your thoughts out? How long did it take for like inspiration to hit?
So, what every single contributor has in common is that they sat down for a Zoom call with the editors. And, you know, I would tell the editor my personal journey, and they say, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I haven't heard that before. Tell me more. And so I'm assuming they transcribed word for word, but then rewrote that to sound like a cohesive, chapter. So I did not type the words myself. I had a conversation with a person and then they typed something up and I approved of it.
Do you think the way that they kind of wrote it kind of like fit the image you were trying to go for your head, the kind of ideas you were trying to represent?
Oh, yeah, I had to approve it twice. So the first draft, I focused on two different topics. And then I read it and I said, you know what? I think we should just focus on one topic for my chapter because the shtick with this anthology was that every single chapter was roughly 1 to 2 pages, and I figured it'd be better if I just choose one topic and fully flesh it out.
Do you kind of think that choice was like made the anthology better in the long run?
Oh, yes, I was concerned at first that my chapter would be too short,
Mhm.
because some people they took up the whole 2 pages, other people took up only half of 1 page, and the tone of each chapter was different. I mean, I'm still getting through the anthology, but some people have a very ranty chapter, other people have a very um, you know, they try to smush 20 years of their internal journey into what seemed like 200 words. And, you know, everybody's style is different. Everybody's storytelling style is different, in addition to everyone's personal journey being different.
That kind of like conversation you have with the editors after kind of like getting the story out of your head, do you feel like it helped you like maybe process anything like better, differently? Like, do you think it changed any of your thoughts?
Mm. I'm gonna be frank. At one point, this was around the first draft approval. At one point, I was genuinely considering like withdrawing from the entire project because the chapter that I contributed, I spoke about a piece of jewelry that I bought myself that was supposed to represent me being committed to my own growth because sorry about that. Because as a girl, as a woman, you're socialized into believing, oh, if I get jewelry, it's supposed to, represent my relationship with a man, which if other women want to do that, that's fine. But I think getting jewelry to represent commitment to oneself should be more common. And the reason why I wanted to withdraw from the whole book was because I actually lost that piece of jewelry. But, jewelry or not, I'm still going to be committed to my own personal growth. Like, the jewelry doesn't choose that. I choose that.
For sure. Like, what made you kind of come to this realization with this conclusion, right? Where it's like, yeah, women do not need to center their kind of their lives, their growth around like men. Like, how did you kind of grow maybe out of those ideals? How did you make that commitment to yourself?
So, I am still in my mid 20s, and a majority of the editors for the book,
Mm-hmm.
they're in their 50s. I think one of them is in his 70s. They're all old enough to be my parents, basically. And, when I talk to elders, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you just know everything. And um, when I speak to the editors of the book, they say, your chapter, like, all the chapters touched me in their own way, but your chapter has influenced my marriage in a good way. And I'm like, whoa, I am able to have that kind of influence on somebody who's old enough to be my parent. Because growing up with my parents, I I never believed that I could say something so poignant and profound that it can impact the way my parents perceive the world, perceive relationships.
Kind of speaks to like the impact art can have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of. Um, so this again, this podcast, me and Isabella love to talk about kind of just feminism, how women are kind of getting into industries where maybe historically haven't been as accessible. How do you feel like writing has been? Like, how do you feel like in the because I know in the past some women haven't even been able to publish under their own names,
Oh,
or they
yeah.
use like a fake male name. Do you think we've kind of made improvements since then? Do you think we're kind of getting closer to achieving equality in like the publication industry and like the art industry?
I'm sure it varies from genre to genre
Mm-hmm.
because I wouldn't be surprised if most horror writers are men and most romance writers are women.
Mm-hmm.
I am mainly concerned with racial equity within publishing because even though more and more women are becoming authors, I think the statistic is still less than 1% of all American writers have Pacific Islander ancestry, and that makes my soul sad. I mean, as an Asian person, I'm often grouped with Pacific Islanders, but in a myriad of ways, more I'm just more privileged than Pacific Islanders. And so I wish more people cared, like more non-Pacific people cared about Pacific voices within literature.
What do you think maybe could be one of the reasons that kind of contribute to this and like this racial inequality in publishing?
I think a lot of people only listen to minority voices if they're specifically talking about how they are oppressed. And it's like, yeah, I'm Chinese, but sometimes I just want to write some like fem/fan fiction. Like, I don't always want to write about my personal oppression. Sometimes I just want to write a murder mystery, and I shouldn't. I shouldn't be boxed in.
For sure. Do you think maybe people, is there like a trend where people kind of only, like you mentioned, like people kind of only seek these um authors for their expressions of like racism, that kind of topics? How could we maybe change that though? Like, is there a way people who are writers can support more underprivileged writers?
Oh yeah. A great example of this. So, are you familiar with the Bechdel test?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good, because I recently read the book Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, the person that the Bechdel test is named after. And Alison Bechdel is a lesbian. She's she's known that she was a lesbian since the 1970s, and she's written a book about it called Fun Home that has been turned into a musical, great musical. And so to me, I could care less if a book passes the Bechdel test but does not feature any LGBT characters. Oh, and for your audience, the Bechdel test can be applied to books, it can be applied to movies. The rule basically is two named female characters have a conversation that isn't about men. That's what the Bechdel test is. And so I frankly could care less if two straight women talk to each other and they're named and their conversation isn't about men. If the person who made the Bechdel test is a lesbian, I think we should emphasize that more. Like, she's not just a woman, she's a lesbian woman, and there needs to be more like queer female authors within literature across all genres.
I think that brings up the point of intersectionality too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where gender and sexuality aren't exactly separate, and it is important to view people as the two of them together. Do you have any experience with that? Kind of just like how intersectionality has affected you specifically?
Okay. As somebody who does no collar work, there are a bunch of artistic avenues that are still very white dominated. Like, even within independent film, I've I've tried to dip my toes into that several times. But even within independent film, a majority of indie filmmakers, or at least where I live in the SF Bay Area, they're still white. So I'm like, yay for independent films, small budget, shop local, all that good stuff. It's still predominantly white, and um, as a no collar person, I am constantly trying to teach myself about other extremely misunderstood jobs, because I hate it when people are like, "What is that?" And so I I'm like, "Okay, I got to take it upon myself to learn about misunderstood jobs." But when I talk to men with highly misunderstood jobs, no offense, men, if you're listening, men with misunderstood jobs, they seldom tell me, "Oh yeah, because my job is highly misunderstood, I go out of my own way to learn about other misunderstood jobs." It really does seem to me that it's the women who are going out of their way to try to be more well-rounded, and that I wish that was more equitable. Like, regardless of if you're white collar, blue collar, no collar, I just wish we all collectively cared about just society as a whole instead of everything being me, me, me.
Kind of like looking out for one another a bit more, trying to be more understanding.
Yeah.
For sure. I think that's an incredible takeaway because, again, like, as we see society progress, we're seeing a lot more self centered ideals that I can kind of see in what you're describing. So I totally get where you're coming from. Just to maybe like cap us off, like end off our conversation, is there any advice you'd have for any of our listeners? Maybe could it be like artists, other people in your position, people struggling with like intersectionality? Like, what's just some advice you can give people?
Okay. I firmly believe that you attract more bees with honey than vinegar. And um, my dad speaks with a lot of idioms, therefore I speak with a lot of idioms. Um, being kind to people has a payoff. You may not get an instant gratification payoff, but you shouldn't only act for instant gratification. You should be kind without knowing where that kindness will lead you. Just and I struggle with this myself. um but the way I see it is if I lash out at someone, um I have to live the rest of my days knowing that I said all those things to another person. And even if they forgive me, even if I no longer have a relationship with that person no more, I still will have to live with the fact that I said something mean to another person. And that, I mean, the choice really is yours. You can be kind, be sweet, or you can say something in the heat of the moment, but that'll just, stick to you.
I think that's awesome advice. Like I think we all learn from a young age, like, oh, like treat others how you want to be treated. But I don't think a lot of people carry that with them day to day. So I'm really glad you're able to put it eloquently and into like very simple words. I think that is something we could all really take away. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Mhm.
Is there
Well, thank
anything,
you for letting me say that.
of course, is there anything you kind of want to shout out to end us off? Like any social media platforms you want to promote, any of your
Mm.
writing, any future projects?
Um, Frankly, I think I want to use a different pen name for entirely self-published writing versus my writing in anthologies.
Mm.
And that is because if I have a pen name, then, my family, future employers, all that are less likely to read all of my raw, unfiltered thoughts. I want people who are considering becoming writers, whether on the internet or in print, to really, really consider, like, do I want a future landlord finding this? Do I want a future employer finding this? Because, I'm somebody who tries to write about highly stigmatized things, and maybe I will never live to see a society that's 100% equitable. But what I will do during my time on this earth is to plant seeds for a garden that I will not see.
That is so beautiful. Thank you much. Thank you so
Aw.
much for sharing. If you ever like have writing you kind of wanna share, we'd love to be able to post about that too. So just let us
Aw.
know. But yeah, thank you so much for taking your time out of your night to come and talk to us. That was really great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Maggie. Okay.